For this video, I'll be talking you through doing an additive technique for building a collagraph plate out of cardboard. And I've already transferred my image. I just drew directly on this thin piece of chipboard, and I'm going to be showing you how to cut out the image and mount it. So I want these black background areas to be black in my design rather than the shapes themselves. So I'm going to be cutting away these light tan areas or gray areas and keeping the black parts of the block to mount on the second block. So I've got a few different things here. I've got some scissors, I've got some utility knives, and then a couple of kinds of glue that we can talk about using. So if your shape comes in from the edges, it's really easy to use scissors on these thinner blocks. This is a very thin piece of chipboard, and so it cuts pretty easily just with scissors. If you're using a much thicker board, it may be easier to use a heavy-duty utility knife instead of thin scissors, but use whatever works best for you. It may also be kind of tricky getting into these tight corners, so if it's easier to use a utility knife in certain areas, feel free to do that. I'm going to remove as many sections as I can just using scissors, since they seem to be a little bit faster in some cases and a little bit safer for most people. So you might decide to keep some of these pieces. They might come into play later for another layer of your image, especially if you decide you want to try to register a different plate with the exact same shape. You'll have those shapes if you can mark which ones came out of which areas. This edge of the plate is just going to be left white, so I'm going to remove that piece as well. And most of the other pieces are interior pieces, so I'm not going to be able to get to them using scissors, and poking into the cardboard with scissors is usually pretty tricky. So I'm going to switch to a utility knife for the other shapes. Once I get this one cut out. Alright, so for these inner shapes, we want to be pretty careful. I've got, this is a knife from Dick Blick. I'm going to try first. And always watch your fingers. Sometimes it's easier to turn the plate as you're cutting instead of turning the blade. And you want to be careful not to cut so hard that you chip off the tip of the blade. So keep an eye that you haven't dulled your blade without realizing it, so that you can get nice smooth cuts. You might have to go over some areas a couple of times. I'm not sure if I'm quite through. Yeah, I've got to go over this edge again, it looks like. It feels like I'm through now. I don't think I did this edge yet. Okay, so we're getting there. I'm going to try this other blade. It's a little bit heavier duty, and I'm a little nervous about accidentally cutting across this thin piece of board. So I'm going to start at this edge and work my way toward the outer edges, and then if it slips, I'll be slipping into an area that just doesn't matter. And again, please always keep your fingers out of the way of the blade. Okay, I'm going to cut a few more shapes off camera just so you don't have to watch me do all of it, and then we'll come back when we're ready to glue it onto this piece. Okay, we're back. I finished cutting out my shape. Now, my shape is all connected. It's kind of like stained glass, but if your shapes are going to be free floating like this, you might take the part that you cut them all out of and trace the design right on your block, so that if we were gluing these on, we'd be able to glue them in exactly the right spot. That would be one approach if you want to outline it. Since mine's all connected, I'm not going to worry too much about having to trace it first. And there's a couple ways we can glue this on there. You can try a glue stick. You can use Elmer's glue. I'm thinking that if I were to apply the glue to this part, it's going to be a little bit messy, and glue is going to ooze out all over the place. Even using a brush, what happens is the thick part of the glue oozes around on the edges of the pieces, and then it ends up getting on the wrong side of it. So I think what I'm going to do, instead of trying to glue the cut piece, I'm going to just apply glue to the backing board instead, and apply it nice and thinly, and then position that on there. So I've got Elmer's glue here. You can use almost any kind of glue, but the goal is to keep your plate nice and flat and level. So you wouldn't want to use something like a hot glue gun where you might get some big lumps of harder materials that make it difficult to print. And my goal here is to just apply a pretty thin layer of glue, and then I'm going to card it out into a nice thin layer. A brush should work fine too. This brush might be a little bit too soft. You might need a bristle brush that is has a little more body to it, so that the glue is pretty thick, and you want a pretty firm brush to spread it out with. So I'm going to put down a scrap of newspaper so that I don't get glue all over my cutting board. And I'm just going to try to get a fairly thin but even layer of glue on here. Now this is just a scrap of, it's like a broken spatula, but it has a nice straight edge, so this would be something that you could use to spread the ink out or spread the glue out. The other option you can use are scraps of mat board with a nice straight edge. So you'd want to have an edge that has been cut, not torn. And I'm going to sort of start from the middle and work my way toward the edges, spreading the glue nice and thinly. I think I'll even pick it up so that I'm less likely to ooze glue off the side of the block and underneath it. So kind of a light pressure. I'm not completely removing the glue. There's still a fairly healthy layer of glue on there, but I do want to make sure that I've spread it evenly to all edges of the plate. So I'm looking for that sheen to know that I've got some glue everywhere. And I'll just throw this scrap piece away. And then decide which way you want the design to go. So remember, the design will print backwards from the way it's glued onto the block. So I think I'm actually going to glue it face down so that I don't have to deal with the marks on there. And then I'm going to squeeze out any air bubbles. Once it's dry enough to touch, we should weigh it down so that it dries nice and level. Again, this board is really pretty flimsy, and I'm worried that it's going to dry curved if I don't weigh it down. So once the glue is dry to the touch, and I don't want to accidentally glue it to the, whatever I'm weighing it down with, I'll put a piece of parchment paper over it, and then I'll put a heavy book or some sort of weight on top of it so that it dries nice and flat, and I'll leave it that way overnight. And then we'll come back and we'll seal the whole block, because we want to be able to ink it in different colors. And if it's just raw cardboard, the oil-based inks are going to just soak right into it and saturate it, and it'll be impossible to clean these blocks off. You never want to take cardboard blocks to the sink, but you do want to be able to wipe them clean so that you can try a different color of ink if you want to. So what we'll be doing is, once it's dry, we'll be using the acrylic gel medium. This says Akua ink, but it's actually our acrylic gel medium, and we'll be painting that on all of the exposed areas of the cardboard, including the parts, the edges that we've cut away, and we just want to make sure that there's a protective layer on the sides of the plate, the back of the plate, and the front of the plate. So I'm going to go ahead and hold this down for a little bit until it's dry enough for me to weigh it down with a little bit more durable board, and then we'll come back and we'll show you how to seal the block when everything else has dried.